What is going on, Colts Nation? Welcome back to another episode of Bring the Juice. Your guy, Cody, here. Want to welcome on a very special guest, good friend of the show, Alex from Hail Mary Sports. Alex, how are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing good. Excited to talk about some draft.
No, man, it's crazy. I honestly kind of have lost track with just everything in life. I'm like, wow, the draft's like literally a month away, and that's insane. Like,
Cool.
so we got to get on some draft content here, but
Oh yeah,
it's about time now. It feels
it's
like it's
about
flying
time.
compared to the last couple of years. So
I
I'm really
know.
excited for that, man. But Alex, I know we talked about this a little bit, but we wanted to look at some positions of need for the Indianapolis Colts heading into this draft. As of right now, I think I've identified, Alex, 3 different needs that we're going to talk about, and we'll talk about each of them in 3 separate videos. And so those needs: wide receiver, edge rusher, and corner right now for the Indianapolis Colts. This is obviously in the hopes that the Colts go sign a veteran safety. And if not, maybe we have to have another conversation a little later on prior to the draft. But
Right.
before we get into that, guys, I want to let you know that this episode is presented by Prize Picks. So be sure to go to prizepicks.com and use code BTJ for a $100 deposit match. So, Alex, with that, let's get going talking about the wide receivers. Right now, obviously, the Indianapolis Colts with the 15th overall pick in this draft. But, Alex, there's a ton the Colts can do here, and there's a lot of wide receivers. Colts GM Chris Ballard even said this is one of the more deeper classes I've seen in a while with a lot of these different guys, right? We obviously know a lot of the big headlines, Marvin Harrison Jr., all these other wide receivers that we think might be ahead of where the Colts are when they pick at 15. But Alex, give me first off your impression of this wide receiver class here in 2024.
Well, the thing is, they're 100% right. It's one of the deepest classes in general that I've probably ever studied, especially based on position. The best part about it is that you have a wide variety of roles. All of them have a lot of depth. You want a deep threat? Great. Do you want a deep threat with size, or do you want a deep threat that's going to be more of a slot? Both of those have all of the depth that you could ask for. Do you want a big boundary wide receiver? We got those as well. That's what's great about this class is you could probably snipe somebody who should be a second round pick in the 3rd or the 4th round just like that.
Yeah, well, Alex, when it comes to the Indianapolis Colts, who are some guys, first off, before we get into the guys that we think will be available there for Indianapolis at 15 or potentially even later, who are some guys that you're probably going to say, I'm going to take them off the board for the sake of the Colts here? Obviously, they'd be pipe dreams, but realistically, who are some guys you're like, they're probably not going to get to 15?
Yeah, so there's the obvious top 3, Neighbors, Harrison. I mean, as much as I would love to bring another Harrison into Indianapolis, just not going to happen. And then Romo Dunze, there's a very, very low chance that that would ever happen. Like, obviously, incredible work ethic. But, for the sake of the video, those are the 3 that I think genuinely don't have a shot of being there. Again, it would be a pipe dream if they do, but probably not. The rest I do think are on the table. So we'll talk about it, but like Brian Thomas, A.D. Mitchell, that's going to be that next tier of guys. And luckily, since you are trying to get an upgraded version essentially of Alec Pierce, that's a great role to fill with the exact same type of archetype that you'd be looking for.
Yeah, and you mentioned a few of those names. So if you kind of had a list of a few players that you think would be around 15, would make sense for Indianapolis, on top of maybe some of those guys you mentioned, who would be some of those guys, and what do you like about some of their game?
Right. So the 2 names I mentioned right there are the only ones I think are logical around that range, and A.D. Mitchell as well as Brian Thomas. A.D. Mitchell, he actually underperformed quite a bit. If I'm not mistaken, he was held to under 80 yards in 65% of his games. So it was a little bit confusing there, but there's a lot of anti-Quinn Ewers sentiment because of the fact that he has a terrible deep ball. And, you're looking at these receivers who are athletically through the roof who never really got to show it on the field. AD and Xavier Worthy, even though Xavier had his flashes, still no one really expected him to be 4-2-1 and didn't show it on a consistent basis the way that he probably could have in a more well-suited offense. So, but when you look at A.D. Mitchell, he has all the intricacies that you could be looking for. His release package is smooth. To me, he's very similar to George Pickens, has great hands, one drop on the year, and he knows how to go up and get it, tested through the roof in the 4.3s, over a 40-inch vertical as well. This dude he can jump out of the park. He can run down the field. Like, he is awesome. And what he does so well is change directions at his size, which he actually boosted up to 6'2", 205 pounds. That is extremely hard to do at a consistent level. And I think that, honestly, there was something that was up there in the UT locker room, and I think they're going to be far better pros. But Brian Thomas is the bigger name. He went to LSU. He was the wide receiver to the, Robin, so to speak, to the Batman in Malik Neighbors. But one of the guys who actually plays with his 4.3 speed, he actually tested out at 6'3", 209 pounds. He's very explosive, very fluid. My only issue with him probably is he's essentially a year behind where he needs to be to become an every down starter as a route runner. He has some routes he runs really well, but the rest of the route tree is extremely underdeveloped. He's still working on his release package, even down the field, which he does have some polish there, but not enough to be like a genuine, reliable target day one if you're looking for the route runner. But speed-wise, this guy is probably the fastest, not the second fastest, on a down-to-down basis. He's awesome, and he's the whole entire reason I actually added an it factor into my grading system, because there was something about him that was just not gradable, but something that deserved to be rewarded.
Yeah, so those are your two guys there at pick 15 that would make a lot of sense. Alex, if say this is a scenario we've seen the Colts do in the past, right, where they trade down, they acquire more assets in the draft, and they go and get another guy that. And we saw them do it last year with Juju Brents, right? They were at the top of the second round. They traded down, acquired more picks, and they still got their guys. So if that was the scenario for Chris Ballard and the Colts, who are some guys that you think could make more sense, say in that early to mid 20 range for the Colts? Who would be some guys at the wide receiver position, and what do you like about those guys?
Right. So I don't really think there's an extremely boosted amount of players I would take in that range compared to this, but assuming maybe Ballard wants to drop even further into the first, those late first guys that I'd be willing to take a swing on. I love Keon Coleman. It's another guy who's getting a lot of prospect fatigue. Someone sees a 4.6 40, not a fan of it. People don't realize that in one of the most valuable drills, which is the gauntlet drill, he actually ended up playing that the fastest, not one of the fastest guys out there. With the guys who ran 4.3, he was actually tracking close to 20 miles per hour and not dropping a single ball. That shows a lot of confidence. That shows play speed. He's awesome. And, who cares if he's not a great separator? He never was. It's the same thing as people believing that Xavier Worthy all of a sudden deserves to be boosted up boards because he's fast. He always was. So, I think he gets a lot of flack in Coleman. And I think that those hands are great. It's honestly a very dangerous combination with Michael Pittman, who has some of the best hands we've ever seen coming out of college. It's very reliable targets. They're both guys who can go up and get it. And for Anthony Richardson, that's a great target to say, hey, if there's nothing open short and you just see Keon Coleman and MPJ deep, this is a great opportunity to say, you know what, rather than being a 20-80 ball, it's a 50-50 ball. So I love that for them. Another name I'll throw into the mix. I mean, Ladd McConkey can actually play on the boundary. He's about 6 foot 190, which is good enough. But I don't really want those guys who are slot versatile, because I think Josh Downs really has carved himself out to be a future big piece of the puzzle. The only other name I'd really throw in there is Xavier Leggett. Best accent of all time, by the way. I don't know if you've heard it. Have you heard his accent?
No, I haven't. Mm-mm.
Oh, dude, you got, after this, you got to listen to that. It is hilarious. He just sounds like some hillbilly. It is beautiful. Like, best accent I've possibly ever heard. You don't even expect it. You look at him and then you hear that accent, you're like, what the hell? So I love it to death. Carolina native. So, he's used to being able to play in pretty awful climates, let's just put it honestly, which you luckily, unfortunately, get to play in Jacksonville. So it's a great way to where you don't have to worry about him not understanding the conditions of being able to play in these big games. But Xavier Leggett has that 4.3 speed at 6'1", 220 pounds. He brings that vertical presence that, he's just a little bit older, but he had 2 years where he had quarterbacks under 2,000 yards passing. Not really his fault why he couldn't produce.
As we said, guys, today's episode is sponsored by Prize Picks. Now, what is Prize Picks? PrizePicks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. Instead of battling against thousands of other players across platforms, you're basically picking 2 to 6 player stat projections, and you're choosing more or less on those stat projections to be able to watch those winnings roll in. It's very easy. Do you guys want to play along at some of PrizePicks' favorite players like rapper Meek Mill and UFC fighter Sugar Sean O'Malley? Well, if you guys sign up today, you can find the community plays under the promos tab of the app to view the entries of some of the biggest names on the platform and be a part of that as well. You can now win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000 just like that with NBA, NHL, and college basketball entries today on PrizePicks, America's #1 fantasy sports app. Like a lot of other things, guys, they also offer injury insurance, so your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. So if someone exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player projection won't count against you and the rest of your entry stays live. So it's great bounce back for that one. What I love about the app as well, guys, is it's not just sports like NBA, NHL, football, and tennis, and baseball, and all these other things, but there's also a lot of others that go into it as well. If you like to place entries on video game situations like Call of Duty, CS2, Apex, if that's something that appeals to you, there's a wide variety of sports and video games and everything else that you can place entries on. And I love how expansive it is. Even just looking at the NBA, there's entries you can make with turnovers, with points. You can do combo deals, dunks, field goals attempted, all of these different things. So there's just so many different ways to make money off of these entries. Be sure to download the app today and use code BTJ for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, download the app today and use code BTJ for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, it's sponsored by PrizePicks. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy.
Right. Absolutely. So, but Alex, there's another scenario here for the Indianapolis Colts because, again, we have talked about how deep this wide receiver class is. So, say Indianapolis looks at that, they say, hey, as much as we'd like a Brian Thomas or somebody like that at pick 15, or even trading back, right? We think that we can go get another position, say pass rusher or corner, the other two we've talked about, and we think we can get a guy on day 2. Right now, the Indianapolis Colts, with their second round pick 46 overall. So who are some guys that you think potentially could fall into that range for Indianapolis, or say they even trade up a little bit and go get a guy in the early second round? Who are some guys that you would look at and say, this would make a lot of sense for the Colts to go get him and still be able to get another position of need in round 1?
So the 2 guys I mentioned, those were like reaches late 1. So that definitely is certainly a possibility there mid round 2. Another name I'd probably throw into the hat. I mean, the mid round 2 range, I don't think is the strength of the class. I think if you want to have somebody on round 3, which I know we can actually just highlight that pretty quickly and I'll just attach it to this part. That's where you're really going to flourish. That's where you can potentially snipe a Troy Franklin, who on the field performed extremely valiantly. He tested out really well and just performed awfully on the gauntlet. Don't know what happened there. Hopefully maybe it was just some stomach bug that got him to really not be able to focus on the drill. But, a phenomenal player who's essentially first round grade who will probably be slipping to the 3rd because of an extremely poor gauntlet drill. Brendan Rice, I mean, we're talking about big names here. Jerry Rice's son. He'll be there in the 3rd round. I thought that his 4.5 40 was way faster than how he played on tape. Maybe it means he's become more athletic because that was his one fault in the game. He's essentially A.D. Mitchell, but you find him in the clearance section at Walmart. So, you're kind of getting what you pay for in that instance. And it is still a very good role, very good blocker as well. So you're getting an every down potential impact there. Now, looking at other players on my board that I think could be in that range, I also like to say Jalen Polk. He was that hybrid wide receiver 2/3 that was there at Washington. And, he's somebody, again, great blocker, still developing his route tree, but crazy tenacity and great after the catch as well. And then you got guys like Roman Wilson, but again, you're getting into that slot territory where you're going to be building too much competition. So there's a wide variety of guys. Ricky Pearsall, I guess I can toss him into round 2. You're pairing him back up with Anthony Richardson, so I love that for you. But that's like Ricky Pearsall is the only new name I'd toss into round 2. Extremely high RAS score, I think 988. And then, he has a great frame there, 6'1", 189. Not the biggest guy, but you're having him essentially be an Alec Pierce role, which I don't think you need to be 220 pounds to play a role that Alec Pierce was supposed to play. And great route runner, and then has that connection with Anthony Richardson. So probably the biggest name I didn't highlight initially.
You mentioned round 3. Would there be any guys in round 3 that you would say, yes, the Colts should take a chance on them or seriously consider this guy?
Right. So like with Brennan Rice, Troy Franklin, Jalen Polk, those were the 3 I'd mention in that territory. Another name I'd toss in there is Jermaine Burton. Like he ended up growing up and developing right down the street from Michael Pittman Jr. So they went to rival high schools, Calabasas and Oaks Christian. So entertaining to get that there. I'd also toss in Johnny Wilson into that 3rd round, 6'6", 231. He had almost the same. He had a relatively close 3-cone, surprisingly, actually faster than Ricky Pearsall, who tested out phenomenally. But at 6'6", 231, he also actually played on the same team as Jermaine Burton. So also went to Calabasas High School, rival of Oaks Christian. And I don't think they ever played against each other because Johnny is 1 year below me. And my first year at Oaks was the year MPJ decided to go to USC. But, have that familiarity in terms of where they grew up and everything. Love that chemistry. And he technically could be a hybrid tight end. The only issue with Johnny is his hands. He has really stupid drops, but at the same time has some amazing catches that are jaw-dropping. So I think that'd be worth taking right there. I mean, I have Wilson and Coleman both being top 32 guys on my board, but NFL might not think that.
Right, exactly. Well, Alex, it's going to be interesting to see, man, how this whole thing plays out. Now, we've heard, obviously, we talked about it on this show, how deep this class is. Could you see this being a scenario where a team like Indianapolis says, hey, this is a class that doesn't come around a lot. We need to take like 2 wide receivers here, because we saw them do that in the past in different drafts where they go and take 2 guys, right? They take a guy a little bit early on and then they take a guy a little bit later. Like we've seen Indianapolis do that before. Is there a scenario where you see the Colts potentially saying, hey, we go get a guy round 1, round 2, and then we go get a guy, a little bit later, round 4, 5, 6, somewhere around there? Is that a scenario you could see happening and the Colts actually getting an impact guy later on as well?
Yeah, so looking at your receiving core, I personally do believe that you have 4 dudes who I'd want on my roster. So that I would usually like a 6 depth, like 6 receivers deep in terms of guys who I'd want on my roster, and then have a minimum of 4 guys who I'd be willing to put on the field at one time and feel comfortable starting. So I absolutely believe that there is a realm where you could go after a top end wide receiver round 1, potentially replace Alec Pierce, let's just say Brian Thomas Jr. And then if you want to get your your Walmart great value brand version of Michael Pittman, you could end up going after Brennan Rice in that 3rd or 4th round. I think he actually might be there in the 4th. So you can end up getting those surefire hands with great blocking ability and also that Southern California connection. So I think there's definitely a realm where you could do that.
Awesome. Well, it'll be interesting to see, man, and what the Colts do at wide receiver, but really do appreciate you coming on. And looking forward to the other conversations we're going to have.
All right.
Because 2 more positions of need that we're going to talk about. But thank you, Alex. Really do appreciate it, man.
All right, of course.
Awesome. And thank you guys for tuning in. Really do appreciate it. And as always, guys, go Colts.